Welcome to the Introduction to C Programming. Today we are going to talk about functions. So to start off, just to explain what a function is just a piece of code that will only execute when it's called from another section of code. We already have used a number of different functions in our programs. These functions exist for us. They're actually in that standard io.h header file, that library that we include at the top of our program. So printf is one function that we've been using. We've been using scanf. Some of you may have used the square root function or the pal function for finding the square root of a number or for raising a number to an exponent. So these are some functions that we've been using. Maybe there's some other ones that you all have been using as well. We actually have also written a function. I've explained this to you each time and said when we get to the point of learning about functions, I'll explain exactly what it all does. And so we have written our own function also. The function that we've written is the main function. Every program that we write, we have a main function inside of it, and now we're actually going to learn what all the different pieces of a function is and how we can start writing additional functions that we can call from our programs. Okay, the signature of a function consists of the return type, the name of the function, and the parameters. Every function that you write is going to have all of these. You're going to have a return type for every function, a name of the function, and then you're going to have the parentheses, and inside of the parentheses you're going to have a parameter list, which may be empty, so there might not be any parameters. The return type is the type of value that will be returned from the function after it executes. We'll talk a little bit more about return types in a later slide. The name of the function must be a valid identifier. We have the same rules for a function name as we have for the name of a variable, and that means that it has to start with a letter or an underscore, and then the rest of the name has to consist of letters, underscores, or numbers. By convention, we start a function with a lowercase letter. This is a convention that we have. It doesn't have to be the case. However, almost all the functions that you will see will probably start with lowercase letters. The parameters then of a function are the variables that we're passing into it. They have values that we're passing into the function that we can then use inside of the function, possibly because we don't have access to them outside of the function. So, a function definition consists of the function signature followed by a block of code, and that's the body of the function. We've talked about the body of functions before. The body of the main function is what's inside of the curly braces, the open curly brace, the closed curly brace, and we have our C statements that will exist inside of the body of our function. Parameters, we can have no parameters, one parameter, or as many parameters as we want passed into a function. If we have no parameters, it will look like what you see on line 1 below. You're just going to have the parenthesis with nothing inside of it. This is how we've written our main function so far. If you pass a variable, one variable into the function, it will look like the function that we have on line 4, which I've named my function 2. And in this case, you see that it's passing an integer into it, and I've given the integer a name, which I've named val. Now I have access to that val variable inside of that function. I can use it. When the function gets called, they have to pass in an integer for it, and I'll show you how to do that today. And then the function on line 7 is one that takes more than one parameter. You can have a function take as many parameters as you want. In this case, this function is taking 3 parameters, 2 integers, followed by a character. The first 2 integers have names val and val2, and then the third parameter, the character, has a name of ch. The return type of a function specifies to the code who calls the function what the type of value that will be returned from the function is. The return type can be a valid variable type, int, float, double, char, or it could be void if nothing is to be returned from the function. You don't have to return a value from a function. Maybe the function just does something, prompts the user for something, prints out something, and that you don't need to return a value from it. If you don't need to return a value from a function, then you're going to make the function return void, and you're not going to have any return statements in the function. If you do have a return type specified, in this case you see on line 1, I have int specified. If you have a return type specified, that means that along all paths of execution of that program, of that function, you are going to need to make sure that you return a value along all paths of execution. So that means that if we need to make sure that no matter what, we are always going to return a value from the function. In this case, you see that I am going to return 0 if the value is less than 10. I'm going to return a 1 otherwise. There is no other path of execution. I can't circumvent this if-else statement altogether. So that means that I will return a value no matter which path of execution I take through this function. If the function returns void, meaning that there is no return type, you can still have return statements. You just will not have a value after the return statement. You'll just have return followed by a semicolon. What's going to happen when you hit a return statement is that your function will terminate. Nothing after that return statement will execute in that function. So if the value that was passed into this function was a 7, it says if 7 is less than 10, return 0. It's going to return 0 from the function, and then nothing else in that function is going to execute. That will terminate the my function altogether. The value 0 will then be returned back to the function who called this function. So if the return type is void and you have a return statement, that just means that your function is going to terminate at that point, that no line of code past that is going to execute inside of your function. You need to make sure that if you have a return type of int specified for your function, that you are going to return an integer value as well. In this case, you see I'm returning a 0 or a 1. Those are both integer values, so I have abided by this contract that I provided to the compiler saying I am going to return an integer to you. I could have returned a variable also. The variable has to be of type int if I'm going to return it from this function though, but I could have returned a variable also from the function. It does not need to be a hard-coded value. It could be a variable, and most likely most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time you probably will be returning variables as opposed to returning hard-coded values from functions. Okay, so I go into a little bit more depth here saying that the return statement can be followed by either a constant, the name of a variable, or nothing at all, and that's only if we had a void return type. So you see down there lines 1 through 8, I have a void return type. So when I hit that return statement on line 5, it's not returning a value, it's just saying terminate the function at that point. And that would be because in this case, if the character that was passed into the function was a Q, then this is probably what I'm trying to say looking at the context of this code. I'm saying that would terminate my program. So I just want to say thanks for using my program and then return from the function instead of saying hello world again. So if the value of this variable ch that was passed into the function was equal to Q, it's going to print out thanks for using my program. It's going to exit from the function at that point. It's going to return from the function, and then it will not print hello world again because I have already returned from that function. This will not terminate my program. The only time that my program terminates is when the main function terminates. So if I have a return statement in my main function, that will terminate my program. However, a return statement somewhere else in another function is just going to terminate that function. It will not terminate the program. Okay, we'll write a program using return statements. I'll talk with you all in just a few minutes about that.